And a dozen of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks are gearing up for a grilling by Senate members as confirmation hearings get underway. Among those expected to face extra scrutiny is Mr. Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense. That's Pete Hegseth. His hearing gets started tomorrow. We have the host of MSNBC's Way Too Early, Ali Vitali, joining us now. Love getting to intro you that way, Ali. Good morning. So we know Hegseth has faced these allegations of sexual, financial misconduct, alcohol abuse. Now, he denies all of that, but how much of an uphill battle is he expected to face tomorrow?
It is going to be a slog, Savannah. We knew this from the very moment that Hegseth was nominated. Initially, there were just concerns about his managerial abilities. This is a massive organization of hundreds of thousands of people within the Department of Defense. Hegseth has never run an organization that large. He is, of course, a veteran himself, but there are questions that senators are asking, even putting aside all of those various allegations of misconduct that you mentioned. We would already be having questions about if he was qualified for this position. So not only does he have to assuage those concerns, he will have to then make public, I imagine, clarifying his stance on whether women should be able to serve in combat. That's something that he said, much controversy around that. And then also reminding you that two of the women who sit on the Armed Services Committee that he's going to be testifying in front of, Senators Joni Ernst and Tammy Duckworth, are combat veterans themselves. I imagine they have a lot of thoughts that we're going to hear about on his past comments there. And then that's nothing to say of the allegations of misuse of alcohol, abuse of funds when he was running a veterans organization, and then the sexual assault allegation out of California. Of course, charges were not brought there, but many people have read that report, myself included, many members on the Hill, a lot of questions that they're going to be asking.
Ali, in addition to all that information, we do know two leading members of the Senate Arms Committee, they got Hegseth's FBI background check. What do we know about that, and will other senators have a chance to see the report before the hearing?
They're going to try. It's coming late in the game here. At this point, we know that the background check was completed at the end of last week, that the two top members of the committee have been able to get their hands on it, and they have been able to read it. But Democrats specifically have two concerns. One, the fact that they haven't seen it yet. They would very much like to. But two, the level of comprehensiveness within that background check. We listed and detailed some of the allegations against Hegseth. I know Democratic senators that I've spoken to think there might be more there on a variety of those allegations, so they want to pull on those threads. They were hoping that the FBI background check would be a way for them to do that, to be able to get more information before the confirmation hearings. Regardless, they would just like to see what's in this report. At this point, it's not clear that they'll be able to do that. But let me make clear, it's not just Democrats who would like to see it. Republican senators have been clear that this is going to be a key part of the way they figure out if they can get to yes on Hegseth, and if there's things in the background check that either assuage their concerns or amplify them.
And Ali, what other confirmation hearings are you keeping an eye out for?
There is a lot going on this week. Truly buckle in for the start of confirmation battle season, because you start off with Hegseth. Arguably, that's one of the most contentious. There have not yet been hearings scheduled officially for some of the other contentious picks. You'll see on the screen the list of hearings does not at this point include Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., the HHS Secretary nominee. Those are going to be two of the more controversial ones not yet scheduled that we're also looking for. But take a look at January the 15th on Wednesday. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, going to start day one of her hearing. A lot of eyeballs going to be on that one. And then would-be Secretary of State Marco Rubio, now Senator of Florida, he is going to be one of the less controversial ones, and it'll give you a real contrast of what it looks like to be mired in controversy, to face the full onslaught of Democratic skepticism and questioning, versus Rubio, who is generally well-liked in bipartisan fashion. Many of the senators who I've spoken to who are going to be part of that confirmation hearing feel he's prepared, of course, because of the Senate Intel Committee that he's served on, the past work that he has done. This is one that's likely to cruise through, but again, it's going to provide a real contrast.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.